They froze her bank account before she even knew she'd been taken. No warning. No charges. No explanation. Just a message on her screen in a crowded cafe, access suspended. By the time she looked up, the men were already standing in front of her. No badge. No weapons. Just a folder with her name on it, and a contract she didn't remember signing. "You're not being arrested," one of them said. "You're being reassigned. Executive compliance clause," he added. "The board requires a certified independent interpreter present for all signed directives. Internal staff no longer qualify." 20 minutes later, she was in the back of a black car with no plates, no signal, and no way out. That's when she realized something worse than being kidnapped. This was legal. And whoever signed that order owned her. She didn't know where they were taking her. She didn't know who was waiting. But when the tower came into view through the rain, she felt it. This wasn't a job. It was a trap. And at the center of it was the most powerful man in the city. A man who couldn't speak, but was somehow controlling everything. Or so everyone believed. By the time the car stopped, the decision had already been made for her. The tower rose out of the rain like it had been waiting. Bridge. The city that ran on silence and money in equal parts. She hadn't understood it at first. The boardroom smelled like leather and cold air. Men in dark suits sat along the edges of a long table like they were afraid of the center. And at the head of it, completely still, sat Alexander on. Younger than the stories said. Sharper too. His eyes moved once when she entered and Alani felt the weight of them like a hand pressed against her chest. Behind him stood a man who introduced himself without being asked. Jinho Ryu. Head of Communications. His smile had been practiced until it looked natural. Almost. Alani sat. Jinho explained her role without once looking at Alexander. She would interpret full-time, live inside the building, and have no contact with anyone outside it. He said it the way people read terms on a contract, not explaining, just informing. As if her agreement was already assumed. Alexander did not move at all. He simply watched her the way you watch something you are deciding whether to trust. Jinho filled the silence without being asked. Mr. An is glad you accepted. Discretion is not optional here. Alani's government training had included a full unit on dialect signatures, the personal habits that made every signer's voice, their habits, their rhythm, as unique as a fingerprint. In 2 minutes she had already started mapping him. Not enough signs yet to be certain. His right hand dropped below the table. Into shadow. His fingers moved fast. Do not react. He is watching your face. You are the only one who can hear me. Alani pressed her feet flat against the floor. The most powerful man in the city was not running this room. He was a prisoner in it. And she had just been locked inside with him. Alani spent her first night counting the things she could not do. No outside calls. Her phone still connected to the building's internal system, enough to receive instructions, not to send anything out. Most staff left the building at night. She did not. No personal email. No leaving without an escort. Her room was beautiful the way that traps sometimes are, wide windows, soft light, a harbor view that looked painted on. She did not sleep. She made a list instead. Jinho had slid a printed house rules document under her door sometime in the night. Tucked beneath it was a copy of her government exit agreement. Page 11 was flagged with a small yellow tab. It was the standard continuity writer. They'd told her in training it was a formality to keep her clearances active. They hadn't mentioned it contained a private activation trigger that turned a civilian contract into a draft notice. She hadn't been careless, she'd been legally outplayed by a system that sold her signature to the highest bidder. She had also ranked in the top 5 for dialect recognition in her cohort, the kind of detail buried in a file until someone went looking for it. He had not chosen randomly. He knew exactly what it covered. The activation paperwork had already been filed before the men ever approached her at the gate. Jinho controlled the words. That was his weapon. Which meant the gap between what Alexander signed and what Jinho said out loud was the whole story. Her only job, for now, was to measure that gap exactly. The second meeting was smaller. Just the four of them at the table and two quiet assistants seated by the wall. Alexander's hands moved through the discussion with the kind of control that took years to build, tight, low, stripped of anything extra. Jinho watched Alexander's hands finish moving, then spoke without missing a beat. The team should stay focused. Trust the process. His voice was smooth and certain, like a man delivering his own thoughts, not someone else's. The previous interpreters had apparently never corrected him. Alani was beginning to understand why that arrangement had suited him perfectly. Alani repeated Jinho's versions in her clear professional voice. She gave nothing away. But once, in a pause between items, she let her eyes move to Alexander for exactly half a second. He was already watching her. Something passed between them that had no name yet. Not trust, too early for that. More like recognition. Two people in the same room who had both noticed the same lie and were deciding separately what to do about it. She blinked once. Slowly. I heard the real version. His jaw moved the smallest amount. Not quite a nod. One of the assistants by the wall shifted in his seat. Alani caught it without turning her head. He was not watching the signing. He was watching her face. She filed the detail quietly and kept her expression neutral. After the meeting, Jinho walked her to the door. He told her she was doing very well for someone so new. His hand rested on the doorframe for just a moment too long. Mr. On can be difficult to read, he said pleasantly. That's why he needs someone like you. Alani smiled and thanked him and walked back to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and thought about the assistant by the wall. About the half-second of eye contact that had felt like a full conversation. About the fact that Jinho had just told her, without meaning to, that he was not certain she could be controlled yet. On her third day, Jinho gave her a tour she had not asked for. Every floor. Every division. The legal offices, the trading floors, the archive rooms with heavy doors and no windows. He spoke about the On family the way people speak about geography, like it was simply a fact that could not be changed. He pointed to a long wall near the executive elevator where portraits of the founding members hung in dark frames. His father's face was third from the left. Younger in the painting, but the same careful eyes. The first generation built trust, Jinho said. Our job is to protect it. Alani looked at the portrait and understood the whole trap in one breath. Jinho wasn't just a legacy, he was the syndicate's face to the markets. The board was addicted to the stability he projected. If Alexander fired him without irrefutable proof, the markets would turn before the explanation ever reached them. He wasn't just a manager, he was a human insurance policy that Alexander couldn't afford to cancel. He didn't just need proof. He needed a weapon that Jinho's family name could not block. The next morning Alani arrived early. Alexander was already at the table, alone, the chair beside him empty, the room quiet. He looked up when she entered and his hands moved before she had even sat down. You saw the portrait wall. Not a question. She sat and signed back with small, careful movements, keeping everything low and tight the way he did. She kept her hands below the table's edge, in the same shadow where she had first seen him hide his own signs. If the camera caught the movement it would read as nothing, fingers adjusting, a hand resting. She had learned that from him without him teaching it. I understand why you cannot simply remove him. He studied her for a moment. Then he signed something unexpected. He signed that he had lost his voice 4 years ago. For the first 2 years, he had his own interpreter, someone he had trained himself, someone who answered only to him. 2 years ago, shortly after Jinho consolidated his position on the board, she was removed within 6 weeks. In the time since, every interpreter had been Jinho's choice, vetted by him and quietly replaced the moment they showed any sign of independence. 6 in 2 years. Every one of them had learned to look at Jinho when they were unsure. The first time one of them hesitated, she was replaced before the week ended. She was the first one who started mapping a way out. "What does that mean to you?" She signed. "It means you are still thinking like a free person," he signed. "Hold on to that. This building tries to make you forget what that feels like." Footsteps in the hallway. They both straightened without speaking. Jinho entered a moment later with his practiced smile and a tablet full of the day's agenda, and the quiet conversation folded away like it had never happened. But something had changed. Alani could feel it settling between them, not comfort exactly, but the beginning of it. The kind that comes from being seen clearly by someone who is also trying not to be seen. She was no longer just watching him. She was starting to understand him, and that meant Jinho was running out of time before she understood everything. The blackout happened on a Thursday with no warning. Jinho's voice came over the building system, calm and smooth. Standard security sweep. All digital systems offline for 2 hours. Staff to designated safe rooms by floor. The safe rooms weren't just for protection, they kept people exactly where they were supposed to be. He controlled the building's communication infrastructure as head of communications, the announcement, the locks, the lights. All of it ran through his office. Alani was on the executive floor. Her safe room was small and private, directly beside Alexander's office. She stepped inside and the door locked behind her with a soft magnetic click. Then the lights went out completely. Not dim. Not emergency low. Gone. She stood in the kind of dark that has weight to it, one hand on the cold wall, breathing carefully through the tightness in her chest. She had noted on her first day that this room had no independent lighting. She had assumed it was an oversight. She did not assume that anymore. The door opened. Closed. Quiet footsteps. Then nothing. A hand found hers in the dark. Careful. Not grabbing. The way you reach for something you are afraid of dropping. She knew it was him. He pressed her hand flat against his palm and began to spell. Slowly at first, reading her rhythm, then faster as she squeezed once to signal she was following. She had done tactile signing before with clients who had lost both sight and hearing. But this was different. This was a man who had been shouting in a room where no one could hear him, finally finding a way to make sound. He moved deliberately away from the camera corner. She felt him angle them both toward the wall. He knew every blind spot in his own building, the places the cameras couldn't see, even in the dark. He spelled that Jinho had planned this blackout. He spelled that the board meeting in 4 days was the real target. Jinho intended to table a resignation letter in Alexander's name. Health reasons. Effective immediately. The board would pass it before anyone asked a question. Alani spelled against his palm. "What do you need from me?" 3 seconds of stillness. Then one word pressed carefully into her skin. Everything. The lights came back on 40 minutes into the 2-hour window. Alani had already moved to the far wall. Alexander stood near the door. 6 feet between them, nothing on the camera but 2 people waiting in separate corners like strangers. His eyes found her face and something in them was open in a way she had not seen before. Not the stone. Not the calculation. Something honest underneath all of it. But Alani's hand stayed warm for a long time after. And she understood now what she was actually being asked to do. Not just interpret. Not just witness. Stand between him and the thing that was erasing him, and refuse to move. She had never been asked for something that large before. She found, to her own surprise, that she did not want to say no. Jinho left a tablet on Alani's desk the next morning. A note on top said, for reference, study his style so your translations feel consistent. He handed it to her like it didn't matter what she noticed. It wasn't reference. It was instruction. On the screen was a video. The tablet was his, which meant anything on it could disappear. Alexander seated against a gray wall, signing a direct order to the regional offices. Move funds to the central account. Restructure the coastal leadership. Step down from his position, effective immediately. Already sent to every regional director, the system display confirmed it. Alani watched it once through. Then again. Something was wrong in the way a wrong note is wrong, you feel it before you can name it. On the third watch she caught it. The signing was beautiful. Every shape clean, every movement wide and full, perfectly following the formal rules taught in every first-year course, clean enough to pass to anyone who didn't know him. That was the problem. The real Alexander never signed like that. In 4 days of watching him she had learned his dialect the way her government training had taught her, not just the words but the voice behind them. His signs were tight, low, built close to his body. The tucked thumb on transfer. The one-hand carry where the textbook used to. Small decisions made over years by a man who had learned to speak without being watched. The man in this video was signing for an audience. The real Alexander signed like he was hiding. She looked around her office. No cameras in the corners, she had checked on her first day out of habit. She opened the fire safety tablet mounted beside the door. It was designed to work when the rest of the system didn't. Jinho had mandated these because they were the only devices that bypassed the central server, a safety feature for blackouts. He'd built a backdoor for a crisis, never imagining his own interpreter would be the one to walk through it. She angled it toward her desk screen and recorded 40 seconds of the video, just enough to capture the hand shapes. Then she moved the file into the tablet's restricted partition and cleared the original. When she set the screen back to its default display, there was nothing left to find. He had built a fake version of Alexander's voice. Clean enough to fool a board that couldn't read sign language. Wrong enough for anyone who could. He had given her what looked like evidence, knowing that without context, it proved nothing. She closed the tablet, slid it into the inner pocket of her jacket, and looked out at the gray harbor below. 4 days. A fake video. A silenced man. And one junior aide by the wall who was still watching her face in every meeting. She had more than she'd had yesterday. She intended to have more still by tomorrow, or to be gone before anyone realized what she had. Alani packed what she could into a small bag on a Friday evening when the halls were quiet. She was not proud of it. But she had the recorded footage, hidden on her, and still inside the building. She had memorized enough to testify if she had to. And the East Corridor fire exit led directly to the street, she had memorized it from the building map posted in every stairwell. She was almost at the door when the hallway lights shifted to a soft red. No alarm. Just red, like the building was breathing differently. A guard stepped from the alcove ahead. He did not speak. He pointed to the wall screen beside the exit. Her name. Her photo. Access suspended. Report to your room. She turned back and tried her phone. A system message was waiting, pushed through the building's network. Her banking credentials were still under legal hold, extended. Her interpreter license had been flagged for administrative review. Her passport was in the care of Head of Security, Director Sung, pending the conclusion of her contracted term. She was not being held illegally. She was being held by something she had signed herself, buried in paperwork she had trusted without reading. Not owned in the way people imagined. But bound tightly enough that refusing would cost her everything that proved she existed outside this building. Jinho appeared in her doorway 20 minutes later without knocking. The monitoring system sent alerts directly to his phone. She had seen the notification panel on his desk on the first day. I heard the East Corridor sensor triggered, he said, leaning against the frame. His voice was pleasant. Sometimes new staff feel overwhelmed in the first week. It's completely normal. He looked at her bag on the bed. Then at her face. The work gets easier, he said. And you are very good at it. It would be a real loss if that changed. He left without closing the door all the way. Alani stared at the gap for a long time. Then she looked at the fire safety tablet in her jacket pocket. The footage was still there. Director Sung had her passport. The east door was sealed. Everything that made her a person in the outside world was in someone else's hands. Which meant the only direction left was forward. She put her bag away, item by item, and started thinking about the board meeting. 3 days before the board meeting, the morning after she tried to leave, Alani found a note under her breakfast tray. Not a digital message. A handwritten card on plain paper, the kind used for building maintenance requests, which ran through a separate paper trail that Jin-ho had never bothered to monitor because maintenance was beneath his attention. 7 a.m. My office. Tell no one. A. He was standing at the window when she arrived. The office had 3 cameras she could see and 1 she could not, a small lens mounted inside the ventilation panel above the desk, angled at the chair where visitors sat. Alexander had found it 6 months ago. Removing it would have raised questions he could not afford. He had left it exactly where it was and learned to work around it, the same way he had learned to work around everything Jin-ho built. He turned and signed before she had closed the door behind her, quickly, with his back angled to the room's main camera so his hands were in the blind spot she now knew as well as he did. I need you to fight with me. Out loud. In front of the room. Tomorrow. She signed back small and low. You want a scene? I want bait, he signed. Jin-ho has a second set of eyes inside the boardroom. Someone who watches my moods and reports back so Jin-ho always knows when I am closest to breaking. I need to know who it is before the final meeting or every move you make in that room will be expected. The plan was straightforward. Alani would stand up mid-meeting and demand her freedom. Loud. Angry. Real-looking. Alexander would respond with wide, visible signing, the kind even non-signers could read as fury. It needed to look like the boss had finally cracked. The real spy in the room would not be frightened by that. They would be pleased. And pleased people stopped being careful. Jin-ho will be watching you, she signed. Who watches the room? You do, he signed. Watching the room is your job. It will not look strange. It will look professional. She thought about that. He was right. An interpreter scanning for nonverbal reactions was standard practice. It was the perfect cover because it was also the truth. If I'm wrong about the spy? She signed. You won't be, he signed. Then, quieter, the sign smaller and closer to his chest. I have been watching this room for 2 years. I know every face in it. He signed that suspicion without proof only gave Jin-ho a reason to move faster. He needed someone who could confirm what he saw so the accusation could not be dismissed as paranoia from a man the board already believed was losing his mind. She looked at him for a moment. The morning light made him look less like a statue and more like a person who was very tired of pretending to be one. I'll be ready, she signed. He nodded once. Then he signed something small that he did not follow with eye contact, like a person who says something true and immediately needs to look somewhere else. Thank you for staying. Alani left without answering. Some things were too careful to say out loud, even in silence. The staged fight worked exactly as he said it would. Alani stood up mid-meeting, chair scraping loud against the floor, and said she was done. She wanted her accounts unfrozen, her passport back from Director Sung, and a car to the station by noon. Alexander rose and his hands moved wide and hard, the signing of a man losing control, readable from across the room. Jin-ho translated it into cold threat, smooth as always. The room went tense. Alani watched every face while she shouted. Third seat from the left. Junior aide named Beck. He leaned forward by 2 inches, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, and his hands moved under the table sending a message he thought no one would notice. He was not scared. He was satisfied. He thought this was real. Alani held the information behind her neutral face and let the performance end. Afterward, alone with Alexander for 3 minutes while Jin-ho stepped out, she signed Beck's seat number. Alexander's eyes confirmed what she already suspected. He had thought it was Beck for months. Now he was certain. He signed that they needed to leave Beck in place. A moved target would warn Jinho before the final meeting. That night Alani lay awake running the plan forward in her mind. They had expected Jinho to make his move inside the boardroom. They had to let him keep reporting until it was too late for the information to be useful. He made it 12 hours early, while the building was quiet and no one was watching the system. By the time Alani's phone lit up with the alert, it was already sent. The leak came the next morning. Every board member had the same file waiting before 6 a.m. Alexander's full medical history, including a specialist report that described nerve involvement and possible cognitive effects from his surgery. The language was careful and technical and specifically designed to frighten people who did not understand medicine. Alani had seen the real file in the archive during Jinho's tour. He had opened it briefly to demonstrate how tightly the archive was controlled, just long enough for her to catch what mattered before it closed again. The real report said the damage was to the vocal cords only. Permanent but isolated. His mind was completely intact. Only one person had the archive access code and had opened that file in the past week. Jinho. By 9 a.m. the board was already discussing incapacity. Jinho moved through the halls with a new weight in his step. Alani went to Alexander's office and found him at his desk, hands flat on the surface, very still. He signed without looking up. I stayed silent to protect this company. I did not see that my silence was making it easier for them. She sat across from him. She let the truth sit between them for a moment before she answered. The silence was not the problem. They were the problem. You protected the wrong thing because you did not know who the real threat was. Now you do. He looked at her then. Something moved across his face that was not the mask and not the stone, something older and more honest than either. His hand moved across the desk and rested near hers without closing the distance. Close enough to feel the warmth. Neither of them moved. Tomorrow, she signed finally. We end it tomorrow. He nodded once. And for the first time since she had arrived in this city, he looked like a man who believed that. The boardroom was full. Every board member present. Every seat taken. Jinho stood behind Alexander with the posture of a man who had already written the ending. Alani sat at the corner of the long table with the fire safety tablet in her jacket pocket, its edges sharp against her ribs. The board leader opened the meeting and gave the floor to Jinho. Jinho's speech was smooth, measured, and entirely rehearsed, the kind delivered by a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. He said Mr. On had reflected carefully on the medical findings. He said the weight of leadership had become a burden that could no longer be carried in good conscience, that he wished to step down with gratitude and dignity and full confidence in the transition. Alexander's hands moved through the entire speech. Slow. Formal. Appearing to agree. They were not agreeing. He was signing the names of every hidden account Jinho had moved money into, the file numbers of the altered medical records, the date stamps that proved the original report had been changed from the inside. He signed it all in sequence, directly to Alani, low and tight where only she could read it. She let Jinho finish. She let the room settle into the silence that follows what sounds like an ending. Then she stood up. That is not what he said. Jinho's smile went very still. From the third seat on the left, Beck went pale. Alani connected the fire safety tablet to the room's emergency display port, the same universal connection used in every floor safety briefing system, the same one she had used twice already during Jinho's mandatory compliance walkthroughs. The fake video appeared on the screen, wide, clean, textbook-perfect signing that looked exactly like what people imagined Alexander On to be. She walked the board through it, the tucked thumb that was missing, the formal grammar of a man performing a character. Then she pivoted to the data. She told them she wasn't asking for their trust, she was asking them to look at the logs. One man had signed the order, another man's credentials had opened the file to forge it. Then she pulled up the second file, from the staged argument 2 days earlier, while every eye in the room was on Alexander. She had used Beck's momentary distraction to photograph the archive system's open access log with her phone from across the desk. She put it on the screen now beside the altered medical file. One entry on that file in the past week. Jinho's credentials. The morning before the leak. Line by line, in front of everyone. The timestamps matched the transfer orders already flagged in last quarter's audit, discrepancies no one had been able to explain until now. Jinho stepped forward. His voice rose for the first time, sharp and certain. He said she was a contractor who had been in this building for 1 week. He said his family had protected this syndicate for 30 years. He asked the board who they intended to believe. Director Wu, seated fourth from the head, set down his pen. I have been asking questions about the regional account transfers for 2 months, he said quietly. No one would show me the source orders. Now I am looking at why. 2 others exchanged a glance they did not bother to hide. The room shifted, not suddenly, but like something that had already been leaning this way for weeks. Jinho felt it. His voice rose again, but the board leader stood and the sound of the chair was enough. The room went quiet. Alexander rose. He signed one sentence, slow and clear, with his hands fully open and his posture straight for the first time since Alani had arrived. She spoke it without hesitation. She is not my voice. She is my witness. And she has seen everything. The silence after that was the kind that means something is finished. Security arrived 2 minutes later. Quietly. It was over by noon. Jinho was walked out of the building with his communications access revoked and his access to every syndicate account, contract, and system frozen under the internal charter. The external wealth he had quietly moved outside the syndicate was a separate matter, one the board had already referred to the courts. What they controlled, they ended today. The syndicate operated under its own charter, and the charter was clear about theft from the inside. Beck had begun cooperating with the board's internal investigators before Jinho reached the lobby, which was why Beck left in a car rather than on foot. He would face consequences. Jinho would face worse. The board voted before 2 o'clock. Alexander remained. The first thing Alexander signed after the vote was an order to the syndicate's legal team: contact every regional director, pull back the fake fund transfer orders, and confirm in writing that the resignation video was fabricated. It would take days to untangle. But it would be untangled. Alani sat alone in her office for a long time after. Her phone had signal. Her bank account was unfrozen. A knock came at her door mid-afternoon, and when she opened it, Director Sung, head of security, handed her a plain envelope without speaking. Her passport was inside, exactly as she had left it. Alexander had sent the order the moment the vote was counted. She held it in both hands and felt the strange lightness of being a person again. A maintenance card appeared under her door an hour later. One line in the same handwriting as before. Balcony. When you're ready. He was leaning on the railing when she stepped outside, jacket off, looking at the harbor where the fog had finally thinned enough to show the water beneath it. He turned when he heard her and his hands moved slowly, not the tight survival mode signing of the past week, but something more open, like a man who had remembered he was allowed to take up space. He signed that 6 interpreters had sat in her chair before her. Every one of them had learned to look at Jinho when they were uncertain. Not one of them had ever looked at him. She signed back. You were worth looking at. He was quiet for a moment. The harbor moved below them, cold and wide and full of light. Then he signed the last thing carefully, like each shape cost him something real. I did not bring you here to be my voice. I brought you here to be my witness. But you became something I did not plan for. She looked at him. What? He met her eyes and held them and signed one word without looking away. Necessary. Alani leaned on the railing beside him. Close enough that their arms touched. He did not move away. She did not either. Below them the city of Hanulbridge stretched out in every direction, loud and complicated and full of people who had no idea what had just happened in the tower above them. The ghost of Hanulbridge was still silent. But for the first time in 2 years, the silence was his own.